But I want to start by saying something about my own position. I am often called a Stalinist, or you're pro-Stalin. And the way that tends to work is if you get called pro-Stalin, at the same time, by the same token, your objectivity is called into question. Well, you're here to defend Stalin, right? Sort of like a defense attorney's job is to get his client off, right? Whether he's guilty or innocent, you try to put forth the best possible case in favor of his client to get him off, right? That's what we expect of a defense attorney. Doesn't always happen, but in theory, that's what defense attorneys do. So therefore, you don't expect objectivity from a defense attorney. The defense attorney, in some sense, is not really there to find out the truth. The defense attorney is there for some other purpose. So I reject the term Stalinist or pro-Stalin or a defender of Stalin. I do not defend Stalin. I strive very hard to be objective, to find out the truth. What the hell actually happened? Okay? And the reason is that, as you all know better than I'm sure, there was this magnificent movement, the international communist movement of the 20th century, that seemed to promise communism. And it failed in that goal, right? And ultimately collapsed. And those of us who are sympathetic with that goal of communism and a kind of capitalism and so forth need to know what actually happened so we can learn the lessons that immense experience has to teach us. Okay? We need to know what the Bolsheviks and the Comintern and all those parties did that was right. Stalin, right? And we need to know what they did that was wrong. So first of all, we need to know what happened before we can even decide what's right, what they did that was right, and what they did that was wrong. Are you with me so far? Okay. So we need to know what happened. So therefore, I'm here to find my self-appointed task, so to speak, and my interest in this historical period is to find out what happened. Not to defend anybody, and not to defend the movement as such, but simply to find out what happened. So I strive hard to be objective, and the way to be objective, the only way to be objective is to pay special attention to any evidence that tends to put your own preconceived ideas and biases in doubt, that tends to question or cause you to question your own biases and preconceived ideas, because everybody has biases and preconceived ideas. It's impossible to come to this subject with a completely blank slate, right? With no preconceived ideas. So you need to lean over backwards, so to speak, to consider the possibility that your own preconceived ideas may be wrong, and you need to look hard for the evidence in that, no matter what it is, and try to follow the evidence where it leads, okay, and not bias it. So that's what I try to do, and that's what I have tried to do in this book as well. So let me get started with the presentation, formal part of the presentation. Today I'm going to tell you about two recent discoveries concerning Soviet history of the Stalin period. First, though, I will explain why they are important to all of us, I believe. The history of the Soviet Union during the time of Joseph Stalin's leadership has been the subject of lies, forgeries, falsifications, and slander since the 1920s. Since the end of the Soviet Union in 1991, a great many primary documents from former Soviet archives, which were previously closed, have been published in Russia. This evidence permits us to see that the historical account of the Stalin period that we have all been taught and that has entered the groundwater, become general knowledge, that historical account is utterly false, a monstrous anti-communist fabrication. Yet this demonized account of Stalin himself and of Soviet history during his time is widely, almost universally, believed even on the left, using the term left in a very broad sense, right? For example, the French philosopher Alain Badiou, who is going around the world talking up the issue of communism, about how everybody should be once again interested in the goal of communism, kind of like Slavoj Žižek and some others are doing. Badiou writes of, quote, Stalin and his terrorist vision of the state. In other words, even the people who are talking up communism today, there are some, don't understand Soviet history. Last year, at a couple of conferences I went to, I reported on my discovery that Leon Trotsky's essays about the Kirov murder were a provable fabrication. That is, Trotsky deliberately lied about the Kirov murder, and that's a somewhat different subject, but I ran across that information while doing this research. Once he had begun, Trotsky had to continue to fabricate greater and greater lies about Stalin's so-called frame-ups and amalgams. Trotsky had to lie, of course, to protect his ongoing conspiracy to overthrow Stalin. But Trotsky's followers, and after them the pro-capitalist anti-communists, believed him. Trotsky's lies fooled only his own followers until Nikita Khrushchev's infamous secret speech at the 20th Party Congress in February 1956. Khrushchev's so-called revelations made Trotsky look like the prophet that Isaac Deutscher's truly dishonest biography made him out to be. After the 22nd Party Congress of 1961, where Khrushchev and his men attacked Stalin with even more venom, many Soviet historians elaborated Khrushchev's lies. These falsehoods were repeated by Cold War anti-communists like Robert Conquest. They also entered left discourse, not only through the works of Trotskyists and anarchists, but through those of pro-Moscow communists, who of course had to accept Khrushchev's version, and I think for the most part did accept it in good faith. Trotsky's and Khrushchev's lies were amplified during Mikhail Gorbachev's and Boris Yeltsin's time by professional Soviet and then Russian historians. Today, all the post-Soviet states, plus those of the former Soviet bloc, are committed to strongly anti-communist and especially anti-Stalin versions of history. This anti-Stalinism is necessary to justify their super-exploitative policies towards their own working classes and their history, the history of fascism, racism, Nazi collaboration, and mass murder by the so-called nationalists whom they uphold as heroes. And by these countries, I mean countries such as Poland, Ukraine, and others. All right? This is understandable, of course. Why shouldn't capitalists, fascists, racists, crypto-Nazis, and right-wing nationalists lie about the history of the communist movement? But this demonized and completely false version of the Stalin years has been uncritically swallowed by much of the left as well. This prevents us from understanding what really happened in the Soviet Union, and so from learning from the Soviet experience, positive and negative. Today I'm going to report briefly on two recent publications of my own that illustrate how false the prevailing construction of the Stalin period of Soviet history is. The fact that these are my publications does not mean that I alone have made these discoveries. Others, especially in Russia, are also working along similar lines. I'm going to start off by talking about the Katyn massacre. In April 1943, Nazi German authorities claimed that they had discovered thousands of bodies of Polish officers shot by Soviet officials in 1940 near the Katyn forest near Smolensk in western Russia. The Nazi propaganda machine organized a huge campaign around this alleged discovery. After the Soviet victory at Stalingrad in February 1943, it was obvious to everyone that, unless something happened to split the Allies, Germany would inevitably lose the war. The Nazis' obvious aim was to drive a wedge between the Western Allies and the Soviet Union. The Soviet government, headed by Joseph Stalin, vigorously denied the German charge. When the Polish government in exile in London, always ferociously anti-communist and anti-Russian, collaborated with the Nazi propaganda effort, the Soviet government broke diplomatic relations with it. In September 1943, the Red Army drove the Germans from the area. In January 1944, the Soviet Burdenko Commission carried out a study and issued a report that blamed the Germans for the mass shootings. During the Cold War, the Western capitalist countries supported the Nazi version, which was now promoted by the anti-communist Poles, still in exile. The Soviet Union and its allies continued to blame the Germans until in 1990 to 1992, Mikhail Gorbachev and then Boris Yeltsin stated that the Soviet Union under Joseph Stalin had indeed shot the Poles. By 1992, the Soviet and then the Russian governments had officially declared that the Stalin-era Soviet leadership was guilty of shooting somewhere between 14,832 and 22,000 Polish prisoners to death in April and May 1940. For a time, I too thought the matter was settled. But since the mid-1990s, the Katyn massacre has once again been the subject of fierce partisan dispute. In anti-communist circles, it is unacceptable to express any doubt as to the guilt of the Soviet Union and of Stalin and his chief assistants in particular. This is the case in Western academia as well, where debate on the subject, or any questioning at all of Soviet guilt, is simply beyond the pale, not tolerated. I'll give you examples afterwards if you're interested. Meanwhile, Russian defenders of the Soviet Union and of Stalin continue their assault on the official account by marshalling evidence to show that the Nazis, not the Soviets, shot the Polish officers. And I have a web page on my homepage, linked on my homepage, where I go through the sort of discussion, disagreements, and evidence on both sides. In October 2010, a credible case was made that the evidence produced under Gorbachev and Yeltsin are forgeries. Therefore, let's set these documents aside. What other evidence is there that the Soviets shot the 14,800 to 22,000 Poles, as alleged in the official version of the Katyn massacre? And by the way, if you ever want to see an exposition of the official version of the Katyn massacre, just go to Wikipedia and type in Katyn massacre, and that gives you the official version. All right?
How do you spell it?
Pardon me?
How do you spell it?
K-A-T-Y-N. K-A-T, Katyn. K-A-T-Y-N. Yeah. Okay, so let's just set aside those documents. You'll read about it. I'm giving you the short version here. Basically, there are two types of further evidence of Soviet guilt in the Katyn massacre issue. One, confession interviews of 3 aged and long-retired Soviet security policemen and KGB men. These confessions are very contradictory in ways that do not always reinforce the official version. All 3 men were threatened with criminal prosecution if they failed to tell the truth, and were also told that Soviet guilt had already been established. It is therefore possible that out of fear of prosecution, they gave some answers that they felt their interrogators wanted. 2. The remaining category of evidence are the many transit or shipment documents concerning the emptying out of the 3 prisoner of war camps at Kozelsk, Starobielsk, and Ostashkov, this is in Soviet Union, in April 1940, and the transfer of these prisoners to the NKVD in other areas. These shipments of prisoners are routinely stated to be, quote, death transports, end quote. The book Katyn, A Crime Without Punishment, by Anna Chinchala, Lebedyeva, Matiersky, Yale University Press, 2007, is the definitive academic account in the English language of this official version. That book refers to the shipments of prisoners in this way, and here are a couple of quotations. The final death transport left Kozelsk. The last death transport left Ostashkov for Kalinin on 19 May. Lists of those to be sent out of the camps to be shot. and reporting on the numbers sent to their deaths, and so on. It is important to note that not a single one of the documents themselves, that is, these transit or shipment documents, refers in any way to executions. In fact, document 53, cited by Cianciala in this book, explicitly states that the prisoners were being sent to labor camps. The official version of the Katyn massacre simply assumes that all these documents about clearing the Polish prisoners out of the camps in April 1940 in reality meant sending them away for execution. It is this assumption that has been challenged by a very recent discovery. In May 2011, Polish news media reported that 2 numbered metal badges had been unearthed at a mass killing site in Volodymyr Volynski, Ukraine. These badges had been identified as those of Polish policemen Józef Kuligowski and Ludwik Małowiejski, long believed to have been victims of the Katyn massacre. The Polish archaeologist in charge of the site has determined that the victims buried in the mass grave were killed no earlier than 1941. You can tell this because I'm giving you a...
Which mass grave?
Pardon me? This is the mass grave in Ukraine. Mass grave in Ukraine.
Totally different place.
Yeah. You can tell this because there are a lot of shell casings from German weapons found there. And they're dated. The Germans, manufacturers of the shells that dated, put other information on the shell casing. And this means that the transportation lists, which are assumed to be lists of victims being shipped off to be shot, were not that at all. That is to say, these 2 men, Kuligowski and Małowiejski, are on the transit list, okay, being shipped out of the POW camps in April, May 1940. But they were not shot until sometime, obviously after June 22nd, 1941, 800 miles away in Ukraine, okay, because their badges were found there and other Polish military accoutrements. This is the major deduction from this discovery that is relevant to our understanding of the Katyn massacre case. The fact that a Polish prisoner of war's name is on one of the Soviet transportation lists can no longer be assumed to be evidence that he was on his way to execution, and therefore that he was executed by the Soviets. Where does this leave us? Very briefly, here's the status of this question at present as I understand it. There is no evidence that the 14,000 plus Polish prisoners of war who were transferred out of the Soviet POW camps in April and May 1940 were in reality being sent to be shot. This assumption has been one of the main supports of the official version of the Katyn massacre. It must now be rejected. The documentary evidence published under Yeltsin is linked to the assumption that all the prisoners of war shipped out of the camps were being sent to execution. The fact that they were not is an additional reason to think these documents are forgeries. And if you're interested in more detail about these documents, then look at the page on Katyn that is linked on my homepage. I'll give you lots more information about them, including facsimiles of the documents, including lots of other things. The discoveries in the mass graves at Volodymyr Volynski constitute a lethal blow to the official version of the Katyn massacre. This is something that should interest all of us. Katyn has been the most famous crime alleged against Stalin and the Soviet government. It has hitherto also been the crime most firmly grounded in documentary evidence. For example, it is unlike the alleged Holodomor, the supposed deliberate starvation by Stalin of millions of Ukrainians in the famine of 1932-33, for which no evidence has ever been found. All the post-Soviet states today employ Soviet atrocities narratives to justify the pro-fascist, anti-Semitic, and pro-Nazi actions of the forces that sided with the Germans against the Soviet Union before, during, and after World War II. Katyn is the keystone of contemporary right-wing Polish nationalism. Katyn is also a key component of anti-Stalin, anti-Soviet, and anti-communist propaganda generally. Until now, it has been the best known such alleged atrocity and by far the best documented one. Katyn has, in short, been the best proven crime of Stalinism. And it's a lie. On to the murder of Sergei Kirov. My subtitle is The Murder of Sergei Kirov and Why It Matters, why we should care about it. On December 1st, 1934, Sergei Kirov, Bolshevik party leader in Leningrad, was shot dead by assassin Leonid Nikolaev, who thereupon tried and failed to commit suicide and was captured on the spot. At first, Nikolaev claimed he acted alone, but his story never made any sense. The book goes into all the details of this, right? Soon he was confessing that he had had accomplices, and that he was a member of an underground group of oppositionists who supported Grigory Zinoviev, Leningrad party leader before Kirov. The accomplices Nikolaev named were arrested and questioned. Some of them named further names. Two of them named Zinoviev, who was living in Moscow, as their overall leader. The outlines of the conspiracy began to become clear. In late December, 1934 this is, 14 men were tried and convicted of Kirov's murder and executed. In January 1935, Zinoviev, Kamenev, and members of their Moscow center confessed to leading an underground conspiracy and were sentenced to prison terms. The NKVD continued to follow up leads provided by those arrested. Soon they uncovered other conspiracies to kill Soviet leaders. By July 1936, accused by many of their own supporters, Zinoviev, Kamenev, and others admitted that they had masterminded the murder of Kirov and conspired to kill other Soviet leaders. This led to the first Moscow so-called show trial of August 1936, and thereby, through revelations made at that trial, to the second and third Moscow trials of January 1937 and March 1938. And then to the military conspiracy, also called the Tukhachevsky affair, of high-ranking military commanders that took place in May-June 1937. That in turn led to the Yezhovshchina, or Great Terror. Okay, so all of those events follow from the uncovering of the conspiracy to murder Kirov. During the Nikolaev investigation and the trial, Leon Trotsky, exiled in France at that point, claimed that the defenders were framed by Stalin, could never have plotted terror, which means murder in Russian, because that contradicted Marxism, and vowed that he had had nothing to do with this conspiracy. We know now that Trotsky was lying. In fact, he and his followers in the Soviet Union had formed a bloc with the Zinovievites who had killed Kirov. At last year's conference, I reported on the primary source evidence, mainly from the Trotsky archives at Harvard University, that proved this to be the case. Just for those of you who may not be familiar with this question, the Trotsky archives at Harvard University were opened to researchers in January 1980, and almost immediately Trotskyist researchers discovered documentary evidence from Trotsky and his son Leon Sedov that in fact there had been a bloc of rights and Trotskyites formed in 1932, something that Trotsky of course had always denied, including at the famous Dewey Commission hearings, right? He always denied this on a stack of Bibles. Well, you know what I'm saying? He denied it at every opportunity. And it turns out it was true. At that time, last year, I pointed out briefly that this is significant because it was Trotsky who originated the story that Stalin had framed everybody. Well, I mean, he couldn't tell everybody that there really was a bloc, right? So he had to say Stalin was making it up. That's what he did. Trotsky was also the first, isn't it, Trotsky? Trotsky was the first to compare Stalin to Hitler, the Soviet Union to Nazi Germany, and the first to use the term totalitarian to yoke the two together. You might ask how I know that. Well, I think I know it. First of all, I thought I had made this great discovery by looking at various dictionaries and things. And then I just finished reading the latest biography of Trotsky in Russian by two former Trotskyists who are now just anti-communists. It just came out this year, 2013. Just finished reading it. And Felshtinsky and Chernyavsky, these two guys, they proudly announced that Trotsky was the very first to use the term totalitarian to refer to the Soviet Union and Nazi Germany and yoke them together, right? So it's true. Trotsky was the first. In his secret speech at the 20th Party Congress in February 1956, Nikita Khrushchev, taking a leaf from Trotsky's book, reopened the Kirov murder case and tried to frame Stalin for the murder. His men were unable to do this and retreated to the view that Nikolaev had been a lone gunman. We've heard that, right? They're all lone gunmen. And Stalin had used Nikolaev's act to frame his political enemies. 30 years later, this story was picked up by Mikhail Gorbachev and his men and given their seal of approval. It remains the mainstream viewpoint today. So that is the mainstream viewpoint since 1990. All right, since just before the end of the Soviet Union. That Nikolaev was a lone gunman and that Stalin used that assassination to frame his political enemies and wrongly execute them. You may read in some Western anti-communist books, notably a book by Robert Conquest and another one by Amy Knight, written in the 80s and in the 90s, that Stalin had Kirov murdered. But that's not been there. They're hopelessly behind the times. That's not the official view. The official view has been since 1990 that Nikolaev was a lone gunman, or that Stalin had framed everybody. That's the official viewpoint.